Hi guys, I'm Justin. I'm a serial starter. This is a phrase I've never used for myself, so this is the first time I'm saying it publicly, but it's an admission for sure. I counted up how many businesses I've tried or have started in the last about 10 years, and it came out to 9. 9 actual endeavors that I tried to launch or run with or start. And only about half of those actually even launched, and even less than that are even successful. So I know a little bit about failure. I know a little bit about what it takes to start a company. And I certainly know a little bit about the lessons learned in those half or so startups that never even got to see the light of day. You guys heard about TEDxUMary. TEDxUMary is our first company we started that really went well. It was about 6 years ago we went ahead and launched that. In that company, we've had lots of different ideas, but one of them was CoSchedule. So about 2 years ago, we built and launched this product, and that's doing very well. But it wasn't all roses. It took us quite a bit of time to figure out how to build something that people would care about, or how to build something that we could care about and actually see through. So I want to tell you a really quick story about a product that just failed miserably. It was called Today Launch. We spent about 2 years of the company's time building a product that nobody really needed or wanted because there were other better products in the market. And we really didn't let ourselves see that because we were clouded by a lot of doubt and a lot of fear. But instead of letting that fear and that doubt and the failure that it was sort of be a black mark and be something that we didn't like talking about, we sort of dug into it and we said, you know, what about that entire experience could we take and build a better company with? What could we take out of it that's learning? What's there to gain from the failures we've had? And I believe completely that if we would not have launched or tried to launch Today Launch as a successful product, then we would have never launched CoSchedule. Because there was so much that we learned about how to build software, about how to talk to customers, about how to find the right audience, and how to do our marketing with that product, that it allowed us to take our next big idea, which was CoSchedule, and actually run with it and have some pretty great success. Over about the last 10 years, I've met a lot of entrepreneurs. I've met a lot of would-be entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs. I've also met just a lot of people with really great ideas. And they come up to me all the time, and they sort of project in me maybe a little bit of what maybe they want to do themselves. And I like that because I want to help. So what they do is they come up and they say, Justin, I got this great idea. It's gonna save 1 million lives, or it's gonna change 1 million lives, or it's gonna make me $1 million. And they go about telling me their idea, and they're very passionate, and they're very filled with energy over this idea. And when I follow up and I see what's happening, and as time goes by, I started to realize that the majority of these ideas never happened. Even the great ideas never even saw the light of day. They never even tried. And it irritated me beyond belief, because it's like, what was the thing that was stopping these amazing ideas from getting out into the world? And I started digging into this before I even knew it a couple of years ago, and really started to try to find the answer, the reason that ideas failed, or the ideas that never even went anywhere. And I kept coming back to like one thing. I found one thing, and I know there are many, but I think that they can all be summed up in a single word: fear. At the end of the day, all of these amazing ideas were wrapped up in doubt, fear, and they couldn't get past it. And so I dug into this even a little bit more, and I said, okay, of fear, fear is a broad idea. What about it? Can I break it down and try to explain what I think is holding these ideas back? So I came up with about 3 different fears. So throughout the talk, what I want you to do is I want you to answer this or ask this question to yourself. I want you to ask yourself, as I'm describing these fears, have you ever been stopped by one of them? Have you ever yourself had this amazing idea, a world-changing idea, an idea that could make your community better, but it didn't go anywhere because of one of these fears? So by the end of the talk, I hope that I can challenge you to try to identify those for yourself, because we know that once you can identify those fears, that is the surest way to overcome them. So here are the first of the 3 fears that creep into our ideas. The first is the fear of yourself. This is insecurity. This is doubt. This is telling yourself that you're not smart enough, young enough, creative enough, talented enough, or rich enough to take an idea that you have and do it. So instead, your mind builds this fear that says you're not the right person. Nope, instead, you should let somebody else do it. You're not cut out to start a company. You're not cut out to cure cancer. You're not cut out to take the next big idea that could change the world and do it. And you can convince yourself of this very, very easily. There's a part of your brain that's a physical part of your brain that's doing this, that's causing all of this fear. Seth Godin, author of Linchpin, there's your reading assignment, author, Linchpin. Seth Godin calls this your lizard brain. And it's kind of a funny word, but it's because it's something you don't necessarily have control over. And he describes the lizard brain as being the thing where irrationality comes from. It's where fear, anger comes from. And so he sort of goes on to describe, how do we power over this lizard brain? How can we overcome what it's trying to tell us what to do? Well, first, we need to realize what its purpose is. If its entire purpose is survival, if the lizard brain is in your head to keep you from dying, how can we make that applicable today? Well, if you have a great idea, what do you have to do? Maybe you have to quit your job for your great idea. Okay, what your lizard brain's going to do is it's going to say, nope, you can't quit your job, because if you quit your job, you're not going to make any money. If you don't make any money, you can't buy any food. And if you can't buy any food, you're going to starve to death. So don't quit your job. Well, that's an irrational fear. We know you're not going to starve to death, right? That's why you have parents. But your lizard brain can convince you, it will have you believing that this is true. And we need to understand that it's irrational. There's this great fear of sharks that people have. Many of you probably afraid of sharks. It's a very common fear, one of the top. But we know that this is an irrational fear. Statistically, it's irrational. Only about 1 person per year dies in the United States from a shark attack. About 100 people per year die because of cows. We live by a lot of cows. But you don't sit there and watch Jaws and it goes, ba-dum, ba-dum, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, look at that cow. No, because it's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. This is a part of your brain that you don't actually have that much control over. But understanding it exists and that it's there gives you power over it. And I think that's what I want you to take away from this. You know of Shark Tank, right? The show where entrepreneurs go up and pitch their idea for investments from these sharks, these rich or successful entrepreneurs. One of the sharks is Barbara Corcoran, very successful real estate mogul. She has a huge insecurity about how smart she is. She believes for years that she wasn't smart enough to start a company, to own a business, to be successful. And she did a whole bunch of other things once she started to realize this fear, but it was all steps to overcoming it. She knew she was afraid of public speaking, so she went in and she taught for 5 years because being in front of students allowed her to practice public speaking. And after 5 years of that, she got her first $1,000 to start a real estate company and has turned that into a $1 million company. But it had to be overcome. The fear of, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, had to be overcome. And Barbara goes on to describe how she did this. She goes, the moment I realized I was afraid of myself and my own insecurities, I knew I wouldn't just get rid of them. There isn't a program, there isn't a 12-point plan, there's no description or formula or medicine I can take to overcome fear. So what do? I use it as my fuel for my ideas. As soon as she was aware that she was afraid of her own insecurities, she had the willpower to overcome the fear and use it as fuel. So now when she's got doubt, now when she's afraid of something, she runs at it even faster. She's turned it into her fuel. The next fear I want to talk to you guys about is the fear of launching. Founder of LinkedIn's got a great quote. He says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. I'll let that sink in. He's suggesting that you should launch before you're comfortable with it. It should feel a little weird to take something that you've got, this idea, this business, this product, and put it out there for others to see. Most people are terrified of this. So what do? They try to make it perfect. They spin their wheels over and over again, and some people will actually redo or rebuild or reinvent the same idea 3 times, but never once show it to somebody else. They don't understand that the idea of perfection is impossible, and that 90% good is what we're shooting for, because we need to get to the launch. Now, I sucked at this for a really long time, so I know all about the fear of launching. Of probably half of those startups, the main reason that they're not successful, that they're not around, that we didn't even know if they could be successful is because we never launched them. They lived on paper, they lived in our heads and maybe some scribbles. Maybe we even built some things and wrote some code, but they never saw the light of day because we were terrified of what our competitors might say. Maybe they'll steal our ideas. We were afraid that people would ridicule us because it was a stupid idea. And these were the fears entering our brain that kept us from launching some pretty great ideas. And this was before we understood the power of launching. This is a poster that hangs at Facebook. Done is better than perfect. They have this all over their campus because they try to ingrain in every one of their engineers, their designers, their product managers, that if they sat on something at the company until it was perfect, they'd be sitting on it forever. So they encourage their people to take risks, try things that might not be fully polished, get it out there, and start getting feedback on it, as we know how powerful a launch can be. So how do we overcome the fear of the launch? How do we get to a launch of one of our ideas, our great inventions that we made up in our garage? You need to start asking a different question. You need to start asking, what is the simplest version of my original idea? If I really boil it down, this huge idea, you know when you get an idea, what happens? It starts right here and it goes, right, and it explodes. And all of a sudden you want to conquer the world. But what was the original idea? What was the simplest thing? How can you try it? How could you launch that in a month, in a week, in a day, to see if the market needs it, to start getting feedback on it, because the launch is powerful. When you launch, people start using it. That's not something to be afraid of, even if it's not perfect. You'll find out extremely quickly if anybody actually wanted that, and it'll save you from a whole bunch of heartache if you spent years and then nobody wanted it. And I'm going to talk about failure in a minute. Failure is not something to be afraid of either with your launch. In fact, get to the launch as fast as you can so you can decide, is it a success or is it something we need to move on from? So get to that launch as fast as you can. And the third fear I want to talk to you about is the fear of failure. This is a big one. When I was doing research for this talk, and you sort of dig into what people are afraid of when they're trying to start a company or launch an idea, the number one thing they cite as to why they didn't do it is some reason of failure. They're afraid they're going to go out of money. They're afraid people will laugh at them. They're afraid that if they have one failure in life, they can never do anything interesting again. They can never try again. That's crap, because there's nothing to be afraid of with failure if you realize that failure is just part of the process. I'm going to tell you another personal story. I've never told this in public, but I started a family business once. I started this with very close relatives, and the number one thing that entered into all of our minds was the fear of failure. And I think every one of the fears I've talked about today was in that company in some form or fashion. The fear of launching, we worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, never launched it. We're afraid that it wasn't perfect enough, that it didn't have enough features, that it wasn't going to be received by our clients or our customers the way we wanted. So we kept churning our wheels and churning our wheels. So afraid of what the market might say when we launched that we never launched. You know family business is already hard, so put a failure in that. And if you can't look at that failure with the correct lens, it can be really damaging. So we need to change our perception of failure. And I do believe that the failures that people are afraid of is the reason the majority of the ideas I've been told over the years by close friends and family members and students is because they were afraid of failure. So I looked up, I said, what do those who have been successful know that the rest of those who aren't don't? And I found this out, that 74% of high net worth entrepreneurs, these are people who are successful individuals, 74% of them said failure is a necessary part of their ideas, of their business, of their timeline. Because without failure, there isn't any learning, and if they can't learn anything, they can't get better. In that same survey, 19% of the non-entrepreneurs that responded said failure can be a good thing. Only 19% thought it could even be a good thing. They didn't say it was necessary, they said it could be okay. Why so low? What is it that the successful entrepreneurs in this survey knew that the rest didn't? What did they know about failure? How did they look at failure that everyone else was looking at in such a negative way? And this is a kind of a personal thing that I'm very connected to, and I preach a lot on, is that in both a success and a failure, there's the same amount of learning available. It is all in how you look at it. You know, and there's this famous quote, Thomas Edison, I didn't figure out 10,000 ways, or 1,000, the quote differs, but he didn't figure out 10,000 ways to make a broken light bulb. He figured out 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Like, you know, it's a process thing. It took 10,000 ways. He needed to try 10,000 iterations to find the correct one. Without the 10,000, he wouldn't have found it. And that's a perception change of what failure is. I'm going to tell you guys a story of a company out of Minnesota. You might have heard of them, 3M. A guy named Spencer Silver worked there as a chemist in the 60s. And in 1968, he was tasked by his manager to make a ultra-strong adhesive. This is supposed to be bonded harder than diamond. I want something incredibly strong. So he went into his lab, and he came out after a while, and he said, I didn't make the strongest adhesive, but it's sticky. It's kind of tacky. It doesn't stick to anything. It works pretty interesting. I think we could use this for something. And the manager says, that's not what we wanted. Go back, keep trying. But Spencer didn't give up. For the next 10 years, he preached to his colleagues that there was some application with this glue that he made that they couldn't figure out. But he knew it was there. He believed there was something they should do with it. Well, after 10 years, Art Fry, a colleague, was sitting at church choir, and he had a bookmark in his hymnal, and it kept falling out. He'd come back to church the day after practice, and his bookmarks would all be all over the floor. They'd fall out. And he said, if only there was a sticky bookmark. So he got together with Spencer after all these years, and he said, Spencer, I need to make a sticky bookmark. So they took the glue, they put it on a piece of paper, and Art took him to church. And it worked. It went in the hymnal, it pulled out, didn't leave a mess. It's a Post-it note. And so they started preaching to the bosses. They said, all the colleagues, all the managers, they said, this is amazing. This is going to revolutionize paper products. And they all said, no, nobody has a use for that. So for 2 more years, Spencer and Art kept trying to convince 3M that this is something they should try, that they should just send this to some companies and see what happens. And after 2 more years of trying, 3M finally started sending some samples out to businesses. And of course, we know that it's their most successful product to date. The businesses started using them for communication, for ideas, for all kinds of different things that they never imagined. It took 12 years. 1968 is when that started. 1980 is when they finally launched the Post-it note. If you were to look at that tacky glue for what it was a failure. It wasn't what they asked him to do. It wasn't what he was trying to do, but it's what happened. So rather than just giving it a label and throwing it away, Spencer knew there was more there, and he was trying to learn from it. It's a perception change of what failure is. I also say this a lot to people. I say, what you fear most is probably what you desire most. The things you are most afraid of in life are probably the things you want the most. You might be terrified of starting a business. You probably really want to own a business. You might be really terrified of following the career path or the college degree that you really, really want because of fear. You don't realize it because you try to rationalize it. Fear is irrational. You can't rationalize it. You just got to realize it and get over it. Realizing that it's irrational, that you're not really afraid of sharks, but you just think you are. You're probably more afraid of cows now, sorry. Fear's stupid, but powerful. It's a real thing. I'm not going to stand up here and say, get over your fear, it's stupid. No, I'm going to say, it is stupid, but it's powerful. Like Barbara from Shark Tank, you can take the fears that you hold, the fears that you have over overcoming things and following your dreams and following your greatest passion and following your ideas, and you can use it as your fuel. So what do we need to do? We need to acknowledge the fears that we have. Maybe one of the things I've talked about struck a chord. I hope it did. Because we need you to acknowledge your fears and move over, get past it, and create amazing things anyway. Because the world needs all of your amazing ideas. Thank you.